Before we embark on creating this unique story, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new plots, mysteries, or custom adventures. Shall we begin? The cold, late afternoon wind swept through the park as if trying to push everyone home, but Emily Carter remained there, motionless, seated on the worn wooden bench. The shadows of the trees stretched out before her, creating an almost menacing pattern on the damp ground. Her thin coat didn't match the temperature, and the stroller beside her trembled slightly with each stronger gust. Emily adjusted the blanket over little Lily, trying not to show the trembling she felt, both physical and emotional. She clutched a crumpled envelope between her fingers. Hours earlier that same day, the building manager had left it attached to the door of her small apartment. It was a final warning. Without payment by the end of the week, she would have to leave. There were no more deadlines, no agreements, no possible excuses. The life Emily had been trying to maintain had been crumbling for months, but now all the cracks were exposed, and she had no way to hide them. On the other side of the park, Nathan Blackwell, wearing a dark overcoat that contrasted with the fine snow that was beginning to fall, was finishing a tense call. He spoke softly, but his gestures betrayed his irritation. He let out a heavy sigh, pulling the phone away from his ear before the other person had even finished speaking. He walked aimlessly for a few moments, stepping carelessly on the gravel, as if he needed to release his frustration onto something physical. That was how he dealt with everything, moving forward, deciding, imposing. He was the CEO of one of New York's most influential real estate developers, but at that moment, his personal life was as turbulent as that of any stranger in that park. The contrast between the two could not be greater. Emily sought shelter, Nathan, escape. Emily faced the possibility of losing everything. Nathan tried to maintain control over a billion-dollar empire that threatened to crumble from within. Both, unknowingly, were about to collide. Emily stood up and began to walk slowly, pushing the stroller carefully. She was too tired to cry, but anguish accumulated in her chest as if a weight were trapped there. Each step on the park's gravel was a reminder that life went on, indifferent to the suffering of those who tried to survive from it. The yellowish light from the streetlights began to partially illuminate the place, creating shadows between one lamp and another. As she walked, her thoughts were interrupted by a group of young people running past, laughing loudly, oblivious to the pale woman who was swerving her cart to make room. The sudden noise made her clutch the envelope to her chest, as if to protect it, or perhaps as if trying to protect herself. Nathan was also walking, but his steps were quick and determined. He didn't like that park. He was only there because the meeting he had just left was nearby. Normally, he would be surrounded by drivers, assistants, black cars, and doors that opened automatically. But that day, he needed air, real air. Cold enough to distract from the discomfort he couldn't resolve with money. When their paths crossed, there was no impact, no exchange of words, just a brief moment in which her tired eyes and his tense ones met without apparent meaning. Emily immediately looked away. Well-dressed, confident men usually represented trouble. Nathan, on the other hand, saw only a tired woman with a cart and a dejected expression, nothing that immediately piqued his interest. They continued walking in opposite directions. However, before Emily could leave the park, a gust of wind ripped the envelope from her hand. It flew a few meters, spinning in the air before falling near the path where Nathan was walking. Emily held her breath, realizing what had happened. She ran to the envelope, but when she got close, Nathan was already holding it. He didn't open it, but the weight of the paper already spoke volumes. It was too thick to be something trivial. Emily stopped a few steps away from him, hesitant. Her fear wasn't of the man, but of the judgment that might follow. She had learned that people with stable lives had difficulty understanding people like her. Nathan silently handed her the envelope. Emily took it quickly, murmuring a thank you too quietly to be heard. It was her intention to disappear. But something about her posture, her hunched shoulders, The protective way she held the envelope held Nathan's gaze. He didn't know why, but he sensed something was wrong. It wasn't empathy, it was the instinct of a man accustomed to identifying problems before they become a risk, and Emily seemed to be on the verge of something too big for her. Nathan turned to leave, but paused for a second. Emily also continued on, but her steps were heavy, as if carrying years of exhaustion. Besides all that, there was a strange feeling in the air that he couldn't explain. As if the encounter, seemingly accidental, had meant more than it should. It was just the beginning of something neither of them had imagined. The cold still gripped the park when Emily returned to her small rented apartment in Brooklyn. The facade was old, with worn bricks and windows that creaked with every gust of wind. Inside, the space was cramped but clean. There was an almost poetic simplicity in the way she organized every detail. Toys stored in stacked boxes, a small immaculate kitchen, dish towels hung symmetrically. Everything seemed calculated to create order amidst the chaos of her life. Lily, less than 2 years old, slept soundly, wrapped in the blanket her mother had adjusted so many times that day. Emily sat in the only armchair in the apartment, exhausted, and watched the little girl breathe. Each movement of the little one was both delicate and powerful, reminding her of the reason why she couldn't allow herself to falter. But the reality was too harsh. Overdue payments, piling up bills, and the constant feeling that any slip could be permanent. She needed something or someone to break the seemingly endless cycle of hardship. Meanwhile, Nathan Blackwell returned to his Manhattan apartment. Unlike Emily, his routine revolved around appointments, meetings, and decisions involving millions of dollars. However, not all the money in the world could guarantee peace of mind. In recent months, his company had faced severe criticism, legal problems, and fierce competition that threatened to diminish its influence. The pressure didn't just come from competitors, it came from expectations he himself had created. Every move was calculated, every mistake could be fatal. However, Nathan possessed a rare ability to perceive details that went unnoticed by most. And the brief encounter in the park remained in his mind. It hadn't been significant at first glance, but there was something about that moment that disturbed him, something he couldn't identify, and that was more unusual than he liked to admit. It wasn't curiosity, it was unease, the feeling that he was about to cross paths with someone whose impact would not be trivial. The next day, Emily had to go to work at a local cafe, where she earned just enough to support Lily and pay the rent. The neighborhood, though full of life, showed signs of the social difficulties typical of areas undergoing transformation. Graffiti murals, poorly maintained historic buildings, but also small family-run shops and bakeries that had withstood the test of time. Each step she took revealed a layer of the city that most tourists and executives would never see. That modest yet authentic life shaped Emily in ways that no one could understand at a glance. Nathan, on the other hand, cruised through Manhattan in a black, chauffeur-driven car. Every corner, every traffic light was analyzed by him as if they were pieces on a chessboard. He passed quickly through Central Park, past the skyscrapers reflecting the morning sun and the crowded cafes. Observing, calculating. There was a world he knew very well, financial, corporate, political. But there was another world, like Emily's, that seemed to exist in parallel, invisible, and yet full of hidden meanings that could directly affect his life if he allowed it to enter. In the cafe, Emily interacted with customers and co-workers, all with their own stories of struggle and perseverance. The description of the crowded tables, the aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the smell of baking bread, the conversations about bills, jobs, and small victories of the day, reveals the texture of real life that the protagonist faces. She managed to keep a smile on her face, but every movement she made indicated extreme care, not to drop anything, not to waste unnecessary energy, not to draw attention to problems she couldn't solve there. Nathan, on the other hand, was participating in strategic meetings with his team of executives. Spreadsheets, charts, and financial projections filled minutes that seemed like an eternity to others. But between one decision and another, his mind would return to the park. He imagined details he shouldn't: the baby stroller, the rolled-up blanket, the tired woman trying to protect something that seemed more important than the very air around her. It was a strange image, one that shouldn't have any weight, but it did. Throughout the days, small interactions with the environment and secondary characters deepened the narrative. Emily sought ways to keep Lily safe, negotiating with neighbors, colleagues, and acquaintances. Each obstacle faced: the broken elevator, the overdue electricity bill, the endless supermarket queue, revealed her resilience. Nathan, in turn, dealt with corporate pressures that tested his leadership skills and emotional resilience. By exploring his meetings, difficult decisions, and even confrontations with investors and lawyers, we see his complexity, layers of arrogance, fear, and, at times, vulnerability. Culturally, the American setting manifests itself in the way each city influences their lives. Manhattan as a space of power and privilege, Brooklyn as the arena of daily struggle, and the park as an unlikely meeting point between distinct worlds. Elements such as public transportation, artisanal coffee, the urban skyline, and historic neighborhoods add texture to the story without overwhelming the narrative, and organically influence the characters' decisions and behaviors. Finally, the contrasts between Emily and Nathan become increasingly evident. She survives with limited resources, with small daily triumphs. He has almost absolute power, but deals with a life equally full of unseen challenges. And although they don't yet know it, their paths are about to intertwine in ways neither could have anticipated. That week, Emily realized that life wouldn't give her a break. The envelope that had almost been carried away by the wind hid a letter from the apartment's former owner, warning that the overdue rent could not be renegotiated. The threat of eviction made each step more urgent and burdensome. Between caring for Lily and keeping her job at the cafe, Emily began to feel the pressure of time becoming almost tangible. Each passing day without a solution increased the risk of losing everything. Fear began to transform into a constant tension that accompanied her every move, from small household decisions to how she dealt with angry customers or inattentive colleagues. Meanwhile, Nathan was dealing with an internal crisis at his company. An important contract was about to be lost to competitors, and an accounting error had been discovered in the latest reports. He had to choose between drastically cutting costs or risking his personal capital on a risky investment that could reverse the situation. Each decision tested his confidence and patience, making it clear that not all power or money could guarantee absolute control over events. Nathan felt increasingly isolated, surrounded by a team of loyal executives, but unable to share the complexity of his responsibilities with anyone. Fate seemed to conspire to bring them together. One day, on her way to work, Emily entered a small bookstore looking for a gift for Lily. Among shelves of children's stories, she stumbled upon Nathan, who was searching for a rare book on urban architecture for a neighborhood revitalization project. The initial silent shock was enough to interrupt any casual movement. Nathan recognized her immediately, and Emily was momentarily paralyzed. There was no exchange of words, only an intense look that conveyed more than could be said in ordinary conversation. The encounter left them both unsettled. Emily returned to work with her heart racing, worried about having been noticed by someone like Nathan, whose life seemed so distant from hers. Nathan, on the other hand, couldn't get her image out of his mind. There was something in her posture, in the way she held her bag and pushed her imaginary cart, that spoke of resilience, urgency, and a kind of vulnerability he wasn't used to encountering. At the cafe, the problems intensified. An important customer, dissatisfied with the delay in his order, threatened to file a formal complaint with the manager. Emily tried to calm him down, but the tension in the air seemed to amplify every small obstacle into larger proportions. At the same time, the landlord began making threatening phone calls, increasing the protagonist's anxiety. Each interruption, each new complication, added to a mosaic of challenges that seemed to converge on a critical point. Nathan, realizing the company's situation, decided to act quickly. He gathered his team and began implementing strategic changes, cost cuts, negotiations with suppliers, and detailed audits. He needed to deal with every detail, but he also began to realize that he couldn't control everything. Small employee errors, contradictory information, and external factors, such as transportation delays or unexpected regulations, threatened to derail his plan. He began to understand, perhaps for the first time, the feeling of powerlessness that Emily experienced daily, albeit on different scales. Tensions rose when Emily received news that the building manager would require a visit to the apartment to verify payment. She didn't have enough money to pay the debt and needed to think of quick solutions. The main conflict began to intensify. Not only the daily struggle for survival, but also the growing feeling that the world around her offered no easy alternatives. Every choice came with risks, and every action had immediate consequences. Meanwhile, Nathan, in an unexpected move, decided to explore the revitalization of a neighborhood in Brooklyn where the park from their first date was located. He didn't know Emily lived in that area, but his decision put their paths on a collision course once again. The city, with its chaotic rhythm and its small coincidences, seemed to push them toward situations where their lives would intersect in increasingly significant ways. Emily, trying to cope with the pressure, began to notice small opportunities. An advertisement for a cheaper apartment, the possibility of extra work, a neighbor willing to help with Lily. Each initiative required courage and immediate action, showing how her resilience was being tested. Nathan, in turn, was beginning to understand that his business decisions had concrete human impacts, not just in the numbers of a report, but in the real lives of people he had never met. When their paths finally crossed again, during Nathan's visit to the neighborhood to assess urban revitalization, tension was inevitable. Emily realized he was there for different reasons than hers, and Nathan realized that the woman from the park's life was more complicated than any report he had ever read. The conflict began to become personal, not just an economic or professional struggle, but also the realization that their choices could directly and intensely affect someone. At this point, new obstacles arise. Emily faces urgent decisions about housing and work, while Nathan grapples with the pressure of balancing his corporate ambition with the human implications of his actions. Both experience emotional shifts, anxiety, frustration, and, for the first time, genuine empathy and curiosity for one another. Each scene adds layers to the central conflict without repeating previously shown problems, maintaining the pace and heightening the suspense. The park, the neighborhood, and daily urban life become essential settings for this evolution. Each element of the setting directly influences the characters. Delayed transportation, fine snow, historic buildings, and small cafes shape decisions, actions, and consequences, reinforcing the tension and unpredictability of the narrative. In the following days, Emily's life became a tightrope walk between obligations and small opportunities. While trying to organize her routine with Lily, she discovered that the building manager planned to transfer the apartment to another tenant if the rent wasn't paid by the end of the month. The threat became more concrete with each phone call, but at the same time, an elderly neighbor, Margaret, offered help. She suggested that Emily participate in a community program that offered scholarships for single mothers. It was a real chance, but it required dedication and speed. More hours, more tasks, more pressure on an already exhausting routine. This new subplot introduced important nuances. Emily had to choose between accepting help and risking being overwhelmed or trying to solve everything alone, as she always did. Each decision carried immediate and visible consequences, reinforcing the temporal tension. She began to divide her days between working at the cafe, the community program, and taking care of Lily, while trying to maintain an appearance of normalcy for the world around her. Small conflicts arose naturally, customers complaining about delays, Lily suddenly falling ill, Margaret demanding constant attention. Each detail added complexity to the main arc without deviating from the core of the narrative. Meanwhile, Nathan was facing his own web of complications. The neighborhood revitalization, which seemed like a simple initiative to expand his corporate influence, brought unexpected problems to the surface. Residents resisting the idea, competing companies exerting political pressure, and authorities demanding changes to the original project. Nathan found himself facing dilemmas he had never imagined: move forward and risk making enemies in the neighborhood, or retreat and compromise his project. It was pressure he couldn't delegate, and every decision reverberated on his reputation and power. The connection between the subplots became more evident when Nathan visited the neighborhood to personally assess the old buildings and the park where he had met Emily. He began to notice familiar faces from his daily life, the presence of young mothers, small family-run shops, and the area's vulnerability to real estate speculation. Fate once again seemed to be pushing him to become directly involved in the lives of people he didn't know, while his corporate decisions unexpectedly impacted their trajectories. Emily, in turn, began to develop deeper relationships with colleagues in the community program. Sarah, a volunteer who had already faced similar difficulties, became an emotional and practical support. She helped Emily deal with bureaucracy, job offers, and even minor caregiving tasks for Lily, creating a support network that contrasted with the loneliness the protagonist had felt before. These interactions generated additional tension. Emily needed to decide who to trust and how much to open up to, without losing autonomy or putting her daughter at risk. Each decision seemed like a strategic move on a chessboard with multiple consequences. At the same time, Nathan began to perceive the human complexity behind his business decisions. He interacted with community leaders, children, and families, and each conversation left subtle marks on his worldview. Although he maintained a firm stance, he began to empathize with situations he had previously seen only as numbers in a report. Small gestures, helping a child cross the street or listening to a neighbor's complaint, began to humanize his character and prepare him for the emotional impact that was approaching. The park, the cafe, the apartments, and the neighborhood streets became connecting points between the subplots. Emily had to deal with tight deadlines and difficult decisions, while Nathan faced barriers that tested his leadership and adaptability. The temporal tension intensified every action. Every minute mattered. Every move could alter the precarious balance of the lives involved. Small coincidences, like the same park bench or a narrow corridor in the cafe, made encounters more likely, keeping the reader in suspense. Furthermore, secondary conflicts began to emerge: co-workers who envied Emily, neighbors suspicious of Nathan's intentions, minor health problems for Lily, logistical failures in the revitalization projects. All these elements intertwined, reinforcing the main arc without dispersing the narrative. Each subplot was resolved partially or completely, always contributing to the growing pressure on the protagonists and expanding the complexity of the story. The climax of this part occurs when Emily, exhausted, has to make a decision that could change everything: accept the community program grant and risk being overwhelmed, or continue trying to solve everything alone, increasing the risk of eviction. At the same time, Nathan faces an unexpected protest from residents against his revitalization project, forcing him to adjust strategic plans and deal with personal conflicts. The contrast between their choices, Emily dealing with vulnerability, Nathan with responsibility and power, creates narrative tension and sets the stage for the approaching turning point. Finally, this part of the story reinforces the interconnection between subplots and the main conflict, maintaining a brisk pace and unpredictability. Each decision made by Emily and Nathan generates immediate consequences and prepares the reader for events that will radically change their trajectories. The time pressure, the ethical dilemmas, the unexpected obstacles, and the complex human relationships create a solid narrative web that keeps the tension rising and prepares the ground for the next major event, the turning point. The day began with a sense of relative normalcy for Emily, but the calm was deceptive. She woke up early, preparing breakfast for Lily, trying to organize her mind for another day of challenges. Every detail seemed familiar, the light streaming through the window, the smell of bread, the distant sound of traffic. But Emily couldn't imagine that everything was about to change. At the park, Nathan arrived earlier than usual. He needed to personally inspect the area that was to be revitalized. He walked among trees still covered in frost, observing every detail of the ground and the old structures. It was at that moment that he noticed something unexpected. Near the bench where Emily usually sat, there was an envelope partially hidden under dry leaves. Curious, Nathan picked it up. There was no identification, but the contents immediately caught his attention. They were documents pointing to legal irregularities in his own company, delivered anonymously, suggesting fraud and internal manipulation. Nathan felt his heart race. He understood the gravity of the situation. These documents not only jeopardized his revitalization project, but could also destroy his reputation and impact the entire company. The tension rose instantly. He needed to act, and fast. But before he could even decide on the next step, he heard hurried footsteps. It was Emily, who had gone to the park to organize small tasks and distract herself from the exhausting routine. Their encounter was no accident. Nathan held the envelope, and Emily noticed the object in his hands. The recognition was immediate, the same envelope that had flown through the park days before. But the situation was different now. The contents carried unprecedented weight, something that directly affected Nathan's world, and she didn't know how to react. There was fear, confusion, and a shared sense of vulnerability. For the first time, they both realized that their lives were intertwined in an unexpected and profound way. Emily tried to retrieve the envelope, but Nathan hesitated. It wasn't just a gesture of dominance. There was curiosity, concern, and an urgent need to understand. The silence between them was heavy, charged with tension. Every movement, every glance, conveyed more than any dialogue could say. At that moment, the turning point solidified. Nathan's life was concretely threatened, and Emily, unwittingly, became part of that equation. Meanwhile, at the company, the first signs of chaos began to appear. Employees who knew about the anonymously sent documents were apprehensive. Nathan needed to make quick decisions, investigate internally, protect the company's reputation, and maintain the operation of the revitalization project. Every choice came with risk. He could no longer act alone. He needed information, strategies, and eventually, unexpected allies. People who were previously strangers to his world, including Emily. Emily, for her part, was living her own drama. The pressure of the eviction hadn't lessened. The community program offered help, but demanded total commitment. The envelope Nathan held now seemed to symbolize the fork in his life's road. To continue, as before, fighting alone, or to allow himself to enter an unknown space, where decisions could change not only his routine, but his safety and Lily's. The fear of taking the risk was immense, but the situation didn't allow for hesitation. The emotional shock came when Nathan, while investigating the documents, realized that the irregularities indicated a possible corruption scheme involving suppliers and even members of his board. It was a bigger problem than any challenge he had ever faced, and it needed a quick solution. The urgency made him reconsider every recent interaction, every person he had met in the last few days. Emily began to occupy an unexpected space in his thoughts. Her resilience, the way she dealt with problems, and the courage to face adversity made her paradoxically a figure of reference in that critical moment. The turning point also brought personal revelations. Emily, realizing she was inadvertently connected to Nathan's problems, understood that her life could radically change in an instant. It was the first time she felt both vulnerable and with the potential to influence something bigger than her own survival. Nathan, on the other hand, recognized that the world he considered predictable and controllable was, in fact, full of human variables that he could not manipulate with money or power. In this context, the park became a stage for maximum tension. Every gesture, every decision, carried immediate consequences. Nathan needed to assess whether he could trust Emily, and she needed to decide whether to face the unknown or remain in the relative safety of her exhausting routine. Both were at the limit of their emotional and practical capacities, with the accelerated pace of the narrative reflecting the pressure of every second. The unexpected event, the anonymous documents, and Emily's connection to the situation completely redefines the story. The emotional and practical tension creates an atmosphere of intense suspense. Every action will have repercussions, and the reader realizes that nothing will be the same again. The decisions made at this turning point pave the way for subsequent conflicts and the narrative's climax, making it inevitable that both protagonists will embark on a shared journey of risk, discovery, and transformation. The impact of the envelope and the discoveries in the documents began to manifest itself quickly. Nathan, still processing the gravity of the irregularities in his company, realized he needed to act urgently to prevent the scheme from spreading and compromising his reputation. Every phone call, meeting, and decision became a test of endurance. He reviewed reports, interrogated subordinates, and consulted lawyers, seeking to understand the extent of the fraud and discover who had leaked the information. The weight of power and responsibility had never been so evident. Emily, for her part, felt the world around her spinning at high speed. The news that she was, even involuntarily, connected to Nathan's crisis brought a mixture of fear and opportunity. She needed to protect Lily, continue her routine at the cafe, and manage her participation in the community program, all while trying to understand the unexpected relationship that had arisen with the millionaire from the park. Every choice had concrete consequences, and the pressure of time made life almost unbearable. In Nathan's office, the first practical consequences began to appear. Suppliers questioned contracts, suspicious employees tried to deflect responsibility, and investors demanded immediate clarification. He needed to prioritize, identifying those responsible, minimizing damage, and protecting the interests of third parties. Every action required quick strategy and precision, and Nathan began to realize that decisions that had previously seemed simple now had cascading effects. The crisis made his routine more chaotic than ever before, and he could no longer rely solely on the power of money or influence. Meanwhile, Emily faced her own challenges. The community program demanded intense dedication, which meant less time for Lily and less flexibility at work. One day, while picking up her daughter from the program's makeshift daycare, she encountered unexpected logistical difficulties. Lily had fallen ill, and the volunteer in charge was absent. Emily had to improvise, balancing responsibilities and solving problems in real time. Each decision, from who would care for her daughter to how to reconcile commitments, was a direct consequence of the turning point, highlighting the constant tension in her life. The meeting between Nathan and Emily became inevitable. Nathan needed information and reliable allies. Emily, despite her caution, realized she could directly influence the outcome of the crisis threatening her living space. When they finally met, there was a tense but productive exchange of information. Emily showed details that could help Nathan identify irregularities, while Nathan offered resources to protect the apartment and ensure temporary security. The balance of power shifted. He had money, she had knowledge and strategic positioning. Meanwhile, secondary relationships were also changing. Margaret, Emily's neighbor, began to realize the impact of her actions. Small, everyday acts of help now had broader consequences, affecting both her mother's life and the unfolding business crisis. Sarah, the community program volunteer, began to act more assertively, helping Emily organize deadlines, paperwork, and contacts, strengthening the support network that would prove essential. Each interaction reinforced the interconnection between subplots and the central conflict, maintaining the narrative's rhythm and adding layers to the story. Time pressure made every decision more critical. Nathan had to deal with lengthy meetings, clashes with board members, and legal emergencies. Emily had to navigate the rigid schedules of the community program, coffee orders, and caring for Lily. Every obstacle was immediate and demanded instant action, leaving little room for hesitation. The result: constant tension, heightened suspense, and decisions that would permanently alter the course of both protagonists' lives. Meanwhile, unexpected conflicts arose. Employees who felt threatened by Nathan's investigations tried to sabotage his work. Neighborhood residents questioned the presence of executives in the revitalization project. Small incidents in the park and cafe increased Emily's sense of vulnerability. Each event reinforced that after the turning point, nothing could be taken for granted. The consequences were inevitable and the reactions immediate and intense. The emotional escalation was inevitable. Nathan began to realize his personal limitations. His business experience hadn't prepared him to deal with the human dimension of crises, nor with the emotions involved in connecting with someone like Emily. He faced feelings of frustration, urgency, and surprise while learning to balance practical decisions with empathy. Emily, on the other hand, experienced anxiety, fear, and determination in equal measure, testing her limits and discovering unexpected strengths. Each reaction showed growth and adaptation in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The conclusion of this phase shows the direct link between the turning point and its consequences. Nathan now depended on information and external perspectives that Emily could offer, while Emily began to realize that her life could change drastically, not only because of the risk of eviction, but also because of the influence she could exert on larger events. The subplots were partially resolved. The emerging conflicts prepared the ground for more intense challenges, and the narrative gained an accelerated and unpredictable pace, leading directly to the phase of overcoming and growth. After the shock of the turning point and its consequences, Emily realized she could no longer operate on autopilot. Every move, from organizing her routine with Lily to managing her community program commitments, required strategic planning and courage. The time pressure remained intense, but she began to develop new skills: improvisation, quick negotiation, and assertive decision-making. Daily survival ceased to be merely a matter of instinct. It became a demonstration of strength and growth. The first significant challenge arose when Emily discovered that the community program scholarship was contingent upon her participation in a public presentation about her experience as a single mother. It was a test of emotional resilience, something that demanded confidence and courage. For the first time, she had to expose vulnerabilities to people she didn't know, transforming her fear into action. She prepared carefully, planning every word and every gesture, transforming anxiety into determination. The experience not only strengthened her, but also solidified her self-esteem, showing that she could face seemingly impossible situations with effectiveness and grace. Nathan, on the other hand, faced unexpected growth while dealing with the company crisis. He needed to delegate responsibilities, trust people he previously considered mere subordinates, and accept that not all outcomes were under his control. Each decision became a lesson in practical leadership and empathy, understanding the perspective of neighborhood residents, listening to advice from lawyers and colleagues, and considering human impacts beyond the numbers. The arrogant millionaire from the beginning of the story was beginning to evolve into someone more aware of the impact of his actions, learning to balance power and responsibility. The paths of Emily and Nathan intersected more frequently. From the moment he realized that his company was connected to her life, directly or indirectly, Nathan began to include Emily in strategic decisions, not out of obligation, but because he recognized her vision and problem-solving abilities. Emily, in turn, learned to partially trust him, understanding that his help could be a lever to change her own reality and Lily's. The dynamic between them transformed into a partnership. He provided resources and knowledge. She offered vision, intuition, and practical courage. In her daily life, Emily began to identify opportunities that would have previously gone unnoticed. Small changes in the organization of her routine, such as adjusting her coffee break times and dividing tasks more efficiently within the community program, freed up time for actions that brought her closer to financial stability. She also learned to negotiate better conditions with suppliers and colleagues, increasing her autonomy and security. Each small victory reinforced the feeling of continuous growth, transforming pressure and fear into motivation and focused action. Nathan, in turn, had to face a moral dilemma. He had discovered that some of the irregularities in the company involved people close to him. To grow personally and professionally, he needed to act with integrity, even if it meant confronting powerful allies. He began making difficult choices, confronting those who knew about the scheme, restructuring contracts, and implementing preventative measures. The process not only strengthened his authority, but also shaped a more resilient and just character, capable of balancing power and humanity. The development of trust between the two protagonists was reflected in concrete actions. Emily, realizing she could influence Nathan's decisions, began participating in impromptu, strategic meetings, suggesting solutions that connected the reality of the neighborhood's residents to the revitalization plans. Nathan, by accepting these contributions, began to see the importance of an external perspective and the viewpoint of someone who lived through the challenges he was trying to understand from the outside. This collaboration built mutual growth, showing that personal and collective evolution could go hand in hand. Furthermore, the emotional challenges intensified. Emily had to confront her fear of public speaking, while Nathan had to deal with the vulnerability that arose from recognizing that money and power did not guarantee control over everything. Both learned that overcoming these challenges required a balance between action and reflection, courage and empathy. Each obstacle overcome, be it a public presentation, a tense negotiation, or a conflict with suppliers, consolidated the emotional and practical growth of the protagonists. Throughout this phase, the narrative's rhythm alternated between moments of intense action and practical solutions, with brief moments of personal connection between Emily and Nathan. Each interaction strengthened not only the individual arc of each character, but also the central plot. The joint struggle to stabilize lives, solve complex problems, and face ethical and social challenges. The story progressed with unpredictability and tension, keeping the reader engaged as the protagonists evolved in a concrete and visible way. The conclusion of this phase prepared the ground for the next stage, preparation for the climax. Emily and Nathan had not only overcome previous challenges, but were now equipped with skills, confidence, and mutual understanding that would allow them to effectively face decisive situations. Each practical victory, each emotional lesson, and each strengthened relationship transformed them into protagonists capable of acting strategically, creating anticipation for the narrative's climax. With her personal growth solidified, Emily felt that every decision she had made in recent days had direct consequences for her life and the environment around her. The community program now required her to coordinate a fundraising campaign for the neighborhood, uniting mothers, neighbors, and local small businesses. It was an immense responsibility for someone who until recently had struggled just to pay rent. But Emily realized she had the tools and skills to transform the pressure into strategic action. Each meeting, each event organization, and each negotiation with suppliers and sponsors increased the tension and the pace of the narrative, signaling that decisive moments were approaching. Meanwhile, Nathan was dealing with a new round of corporate challenges. Internal irregularities continued to generate legal risks, while the neighborhood revitalization faced growing resistance from influential community members. He needed to make decisions that balance corporate interests and human impacts, but he also prepared for an inevitable confrontation with those trying to sabotage his project. Each strategic meeting, each document review, and each conversation with legal advisors increased the pressure, making it clear that the critical moment in the story was approaching. The connection between Emily and Nathan strengthened during this phase. They began to act in a coordinated manner. Emily provided information about the daily realities of families, while Nathan structured corporate solutions that could benefit the community. This collaboration increased the complexity of the narrative, as both needed to align agendas, resources, and expectations, avoiding personal conflicts and maintaining focus on the common goal. Every action taken had immediate repercussions, and the narrative tension grew as unexpected obstacles arose. One of the most pressing subplots involved Lily. During a day of program activities, the child suddenly fell ill, requiring Emily's immediate attention. The need to balance maternal care, community commitments, and Nathan's meetings increased the emotional pressure, revealing how small decisions could have significant impacts. Nathan, realizing the situation, offered practical help without infringing on Emily's autonomy, demonstrating personal growth and sensitivity. This interaction reinforced the emerging collaboration and created dramatic tension without resorting to expository dialogue. Meanwhile, in the neighborhood, protests organized by groups opposed to the revitalization arose. Some residents feared that the project would result in gentrification, increased rents, and a loss of local identity. Emily, aware of these concerns, led dialogues with these residents, balancing interests and seeking viable solutions. Nathan, in turn, had to intervene in formal meetings, ensuring transparency and offering practical commitments. The growing tension and imminent risks of failure created the necessary atmosphere to prepare for the climax, keeping the reader engaged and aware of the complexity of the challenge. Furthermore, new obstacles arose unpredictably. Suppliers delayed deliveries, legal documents needed urgent review, and a communication breakdown nearly jeopardized the fundraising event organized by Emily. Each problem demanded immediate action, creativity, and cooperation. The time pressure accelerated the pace of the narrative, reinforcing the feeling that the climax would not be just a single confrontation, but an accumulated test of the protagonist's skills, resilience, and courage. Nathan began to reflect on the implications of each previous decision. Trusting Emily had been risky, but also essential to dealing with the human complexity of the project. He began to assume direct responsibility for the most delicate details, balancing corporate strategy and practical leadership. Emily, in turn, recognized that she needed to act firmly and assertively, both in the community environment and in her collaboration with Nathan, consolidating a trajectory of overcoming challenges that integrated emotional intelligence and concrete action. The culmination of the preparations involved organizing a large event in the park, the same place where their first encounter had taken place. The fundraising campaign required coordination between volunteers, vendors, sponsors, and community members, while Nathan needed to ensure that no irregularities or opposition could jeopardize the project. Every logistical detail, from tents and lighting to transportation and security, became critical. Small mistakes could lead to failure, increasing tension and setting the stage for the story's climax. The final meeting with the project's opponents was marked by intense tension. Nathan had to present concrete solutions, demonstrating an understanding of the community's concerns, while Emily mediated communication and strengthened the residents' trust. The collaboration between the two reached its peak, showing how their personal and professional trajectories converged on a shared goal. Each action taken at this moment prepared the ground for the climax, establishing high standards, real risk, and significant emotional consequences. The narrative up to this point has focused on action, time pressure, and the interconnectedness of the subplots. Each challenge overcome has strengthened the protagonists, reinforcing personal growth, leadership skills, and emotional resilience. The reader realizes that the coming moments will determine decisive outcomes, making the arrival of the climax inevitable. The growing tension, complex relationships, and urgency of decisions create anticipation and engagement, signaling that the story is about to reach its dramatic peak. The big day finally arrived. The park, covered in colorful tents, banners, and tables, was ready for the fundraising campaign. Families, neighbors, volunteers, and community program members gathered, creating a vibrant but also tense atmosphere. Emily, despite her nervousness, firmly assumed her role as coordinator. Every detail needed to be perfect: schedules, logistics, communication, and security. The slightest mistake could jeopardize the entire effort. Nathan walked around the park, inspecting suppliers, assessing every corner, and keeping in touch with his corporate team. The tension wasn't just about organizing the event. Influential community members and opponents of the revitalization project were present, watching his every move. Nathan knew that any wrong decision could lead to failure and damage both his reputation and the future of the neighborhood. The most tense moment arose when a group of organized residents questioned the true intentions of the revitalization. Shouts and accusations began to spread through the park, threatening to turn the event into public chaos. Emily remained calm, walking among the people, listening and responding with empathy and objectivity. Nathan, realizing that the situation demanded immediate action, intervened directly. He presented legal documents, detailed explanations about the project's benefits, and guarantees of community participation. The synchronicity between them showed that their collaborative work had reached its peak. However, an unexpected turn of events occurred when one of the suppliers, pressured by interests opposed to the project, attempted to sabotage the event's infrastructure. One of the main tents began to collapse, threatening equipment, supplies, and the safety of those present. Emily immediately recognized the risk and, without hesitation, rushed to stabilize the structure, while Nathan called for technical reinforcements. Each action was swift, coordinated, and decisive. The imminent danger brought everyone to the brink of emotional and physical collapse, but it also showcased the strength and resilience acquired by the protagonists. While the physical tension subsided, another challenge arose. Members of the opposition attempted to disrupt speeches and presentations, causing confusion and disorder. Nathan, using his crisis management experience, firmly controlled the situation, maintaining the community's attention and ensuring that events did not escalate into violence or irreversible misunderstandings. Emily, with her mediation skills and empathy, ensured that families and children were not frightened, keeping the event's organization intact. At the height of the climax, an unexpected revelation completely changed the scenario. The anonymous documents that exposed irregularities in Nathan's company were not the result of internal sabotage, but rather a warning from an independent ethics consultancy sent precisely to protect the neighborhood community and ensure transparency in the project. Nathan, initially irritated and suspicious, understood that the event could be transformed into an opportunity, not only to resolve his crisis, but to consolidate the community's trust. This information changed everyone's perspective and reinforced the importance of ethical and strategic decisions. Emily, realizing that the collaboration had reached an unprecedented level, felt a mixture of relief and pride. She had not only faced logistical and emotional challenges, but had also helped shape the community's trust, ensuring that the project proceeded with everyone's active participation. Her transformation was visible. From a lonely and exhausted woman, she had become a practical, resilient and inspiring leader, capable of coordinating and mediating complex situations under intense pressure. Nathan, in turn, demonstrated personal and professional growth. He went from a distant and controlling millionaire to a conscious leader, capable of acting with empathy, recognizing limitations, and integrating human perspectives into strategic decisions. He understood that power and money do not replace ethical leadership and sensitivity to human impact. The twists and turns and challenges of the climax revealed not only his ability to resolve crises, but also to grow emotionally, embracing collaboration and learning in real time. The climax reached its peak when all the elements came together: tents stabilized, speeches successfully delivered, children and families protected, opposition contained, and the community beginning to realize the benefits of the project. Every action, every decision taken by Emily and Nathan contributed to the resolution of the central conflict, the survival of the revitalization initiative, and the consolidation of Nathan's ethical and humane reputation, as well as the safety and stability of Emily and Lily. In the immediate aftermath of the climax, the tension transformed into restrained celebration. Residents began to volunteer, extra donations were announced, and the atmosphere shifted from distrust to cautious enthusiasm. The event became a landmark of collective overcoming, uniting protagonists, community, and diverse interests in a common goal. Thus, the climax not only resolved the central conflict, but also integrated all the previous subplots and challenges. Emily's struggle for safety and autonomy, Nathan's corporate crisis, community tensions, and the need for coordinated action under pressure. The transformation of both protagonists was evident, and the story reached its most intense point, setting the stage for final consequences and conclusion. The park was silent after the event. The tents were taken down, the equipment put away, and the community was calm. Emily watched Lily play with other children, finally free from the constant tension that had marked her previous weeks. Each smile from her daughter seemed to reward the efforts of the entire journey. Sleepless nights, difficult decisions, small victories, and great fears. The feeling of instability that had previously accompanied her had diminished, replaced by confidence and determination to face any future obstacle. Nathan stayed close, observing not only the community, but also Emily. He felt for the first time that the collaboration between them was not merely circumstantial, but the result of mutual trust and respect. Every decision made during the crisis, every moment of tension, had solidified his understanding that power and money do not guarantee lasting results without empathy, ethics, and partnership. The experience had transformed him, showing him that even the most complex decisions needed to consider the real human impact. The neighborhood, once divided, began to reorganize itself around a shared hope. Residents who initially resisted the project began to participate, offering support, ideas, and volunteer time. Small businesses began to thrive with the visibility of the event and the donations raised. Nathan, aware that his business success depended on community integration, began to establish policies that would guarantee real benefits for everyone, not just investors. The balance between ethics, practice, and human impact became the central priority. Emily received news about her community program scholarship. She had been approved on merit, guaranteeing temporary stability and access to essential resources for her and Lily. More important than immediate financial security, the approval symbolized recognition of her leadership skills, resilience, and commitment. She knew there would still be challenges, but she felt empowered, capable of facing new situations with confidence and strategic vision. The single mother who once cried alone in the park had transformed into someone who not only survives, but leads, influences, and protects her family and community. And Nathan also reaped unexpected results. Resolving the company's internal crisis, combined with the successful revitalization of the neighborhood, strengthened his corporate position and public reputation. He earned respect not only as an executive, but as someone capable of leading ethically and sensitively. His interaction with Emily and the experience of dealing with unpredictable situations strengthened his decision-making skills, empathy, and emotional resilience. He came to understand the importance of looking beyond profit and power, prioritizing human relationships and social impact. The conclusion also highlighted the strong bond between Emily and Nathan. It wasn't an obvious romance, but a partnership based on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. They shared the lessons learned throughout the crisis, knowing that together they could face future challenges more effectively. This human connection, built on adversity and collaboration, became an emotional anchor for both, offering security and perspective in the face of future uncertainties. Finally, the story concluded its main narrative arcs. Emily secured stability and a leading role in her personal and community life. Nathan evolved from an isolated and controlling executive into an ethical and sensitive leader, and the neighborhood solidified as a space of collaboration, respect, and collective development. The consequences of their actions resonated positively, showing that courage, empathy, and resilience can transform critical situations into opportunities for growth and significant change. The world of the story remained realistic, complex, and coherent, but carried the emotional satisfaction of having followed characters who faced adversity, overcame obstacles, and found unexpected paths to success, learning, and human connection. The future was open, yet promising, reflecting the protagonists' complete journey of transformation and the consolidation of their correct and courageous choices. Months later, the park was already a vibrant meeting point for the community. Emily, now confident and organized, watched Lily play freely, feeling proud of each achievement. Nathan walked alongside, chatting with neighbors and adjusting details of the project, more human and present than ever. Although the routine remained challenging, both understood that life was a series of choices and collaborations. The bond between them, forged in adversity, promised new opportunities and joint solutions. The future was uncertain, but the certainty that they could face whatever came together transformed each challenge into a possibility. If you were moved by Emily and Nathan's journey, share this story with friends and family and subscribe to the channel. Reflect on how courage, resilience, and collaboration can transform lives even in the face of unexpected challenges. Comment on your favorite parts, the tense moments that captivated you the most, and the lessons you would take to your own life. Inspire others to realize that every choice matters and that empathy and collective action can create significant change. Your participation strengthens the community of readers and keeps alive the magic of stories that touch the heart.